I'm a civil engineer, new urbanist. I do a couple of charrettes like this per month, pretty much all over the U.S. and internationally.
Susan Henderson with Placemakers, and I think we're acquainted.
I'm Lynn Richards. I'm the president and CEO of the Congress for the New Urbanism, and we're the folks responsible for pulling this all together. And I'm just so grateful and thankful that you all showed up. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
I'm Rose Warren with the city. I do transportation demand management and future production.
I'm Lynn Miranda, planner with Tukwila.
I'm Graydon Newman. I'm a planner with Metro, working in long-range planning and policy.
I'm Maggie McGeehee, and I'm also with Metro, and I do service planning, so more near-term.
Max Baker of the City of Tukwila, I'm also the planner.
Pete Huey, I'm a graduate student at the University of Washington's urban planning program, looking at a thesis project in your summers.
Excellent.
I'm Janet Mayer with the City of SeaTac. I'm the Assistant City Engineer.
Robin Tishmock, Tukwila City Engineer.
Bob Giberson, City of Tukwila Public Works Director.
Thanks to everyone for coming on a Friday afternoon. We typically would do one of these meetings and just get everyone's input, and then we would start playing with designs, and then we'd come back and get more input, and then more designs. We call them feedback loops. Well, in doing this in 3 days, we have to compress the feedback loops. So just based on things that I've been hearing and seeing, I've already put together some alternatives. So it's probably about 50% listening and showing. So it's all really raw, and it's just hand drawings and things like that. So the idea is to get ideas out there and discuss them, pros and cons. One of the things we were hearing was that people liked California Avenue, and they liked Rainier Avenue. So we went there and took a look at them and got pictures and measured what's going on. So this is Tukwila, 100 feet of right-of-way with 62 feet of pavement between the curbs. Could be give or take a foot or so, but. And then California Avenue is 75 feet of right-of-way and 50 feet between the curbs, and same with Rainier. So
Okay.
now,
All right. Yeah.
so this is Tukwila Avenue. This is California Avenue. And this is Rainier. So, so people say that they'd like to turn this, or they'd want this to be like that. So there's a lot of differences between those, a whole lot. And just to start with the buildings being right up to the back of the sidewalk, cars parked on the street. There's only, one lane of travel in each direction with left turn lanes, and and there's signals, and there's short blocks. The blocks are a lot shorter in those areas than here. So there's a lot of differences in order to bring that one to something that looks more like that and acts like it. So some of the issues are the super blocks. The typical block in this neighborhood is 1330 feet by 660 feet. There's no on-street parking. There's a lack of sidewalks on the perpendicular streets. it looks like you guys recently did sidewalks and trees and some lighting along TIB. Has that been pretty recently?
The first phase of that was around 2000, 2001, and we've done 3 phases.
Okay. So that is something that I think we should preserve. So most of what I've been looking at keeps the curbs and, you know, the drainage and all that in place, because it could be pretty expensive trying to move that stuff around. The right-of-way is a lot wider, and that affects what we call an outdoor room. And that's the buildings themselves can form an outdoor room if they're tall enough and close enough together. Septet.
Wait, talk about the 7 feet.
There's apparently 7 feet of sort of no man's land behind the back of sidewalk. That,
Plus or
have you got
minus.
some history on that?
Plus or minus, yeah, there's some extra right-of-way. Down at the south end, we actually, in order to accommodate some of the businesses that were heavily impacted by the curb gutter and sidewalk because we were taking away parking, we did shift the roadway over to the west side at the south end, and then that's why you see a curve in, and then it goes back to the center. But yeah, down there, it's pushed way over to the west, so there's more room on the east side. But yes, there is additional space behind the sidewalk.
Okay. Then I had a pretty long talk with Don, the fire chief. Filled me in on the ladder truck and the outriggers and what kind of room they need and how that can be dealt with. So we had a good conversation about that, and I think it's completely possible to work with them on it. So this is a little diagram of the outdoor room. Trees can actually help to define that outdoor room if you don't have buildings, or actually you saw in California Avenue, the trees and the buildings were forming that outdoor room and really creating a place there, and it was well defined. So then a procedure that we go through on these retrofits is something that a few of us have been working on a book for a long time now.
Very long time.
We were talking about it last night. It started like 15 years ago. It's almost embarrassing, but we're getting close. And there are procedures that we use and for deciding what to do with these. And this is one of them, called selecting the lane assembly. And in the roads here, it can be with no parking, with yield parking, parking on one side parallel, parking both sides parallel. There's one-way streets and two-way streets, and so there's a whole combination of them. Then we also have pre-packaged thoroughfares that you can just sort of select, but when you've already got hard parameters on the ground, they don't exactly match, but there are some that perform like it. And for example, if you did a divided avenue with travel lanes in each direction with a median and parallel parking, this is sort of a rule of thumb of the ADT that you could pass through that corridor. And then if you have this configuration, it'd be 44,000 ADT, and it would take a pedestrian 23 seconds to cross it. So those are some of the parameters that you're looking at in selecting the thoroughfare. Similar, a commercial street with diagonal parking, commercial street with diagonal parking and a two-way left turn lane. And then this is two different ways of doing a multi-way boulevard. This would be 2 lanes in each direction, a median, and then the slip lane with parking on the outside. So, and then there's an avenue, just 2 lanes in each direction, this one with parking on both sides. So I started, these are, the gray is just the existing, what's out there right now. So that's a 10-foot median / 2-way left turn lane, 12-foot drive lane, a 14-foot drive lane, 12 feet of sidewalk, and about 7 feet of AC and or landscaping. And from what we've heard, that carries, or your ADT on that section is about 14,000.
It's more than that. Up at the north end, 139th is the lowest, and it's 19,000.
Okay.
And then it increases to over 20,000 down here at the south end.
At the south end. All right, so this one is looking at one of the avenue sections, and what this is if we're adding a parking lane on each side. PL stands for parking lane, a 12-foot drive lane, and then you're left with 22 feet for the median, or and for making left-hand turns. And then I'm showing reducing the right-of-way and allowing people to build right up to the back of the sidewalk through whatever procedure that would be, selling them the land or using it as an incentive, or whatever would work there. And what that does with those, the closer you get the building, the better defined that corridor is, and you start to get a place, an outdoor room there. Anyone would like to make any comments on that
So
one?
how does that satisfy the fire marshal's 26 feet?
He would need to, let's see, so he'd be in this 12 feet plus into the median with his riggers.
Okay. And he's cool with that?
I haven't talked to him about this
Okay.
specifically.
Got it.
It's basically if he's got 22 feet, he's
Yeah.
all right. Sometimes it could be, say, where there's a parking space, you've got a mid-block crossing, so a bulb out where he
Yeah.
can put his rigger. Okay, another one would be, again, keeping the curbs in the same place, but having 12-foot lanes in each direction and diagonal parking on both sides. So that would take up the 62 feet, and you would have no median. You just have left turn pockets wherever they're needed, which would typically be only at an intersection. But one of the cons of not having that two-way left turn lane is there's a lot of existing driveways. So they would either you wouldn't be able to turn left into them, or you'd be putting a lot of pockets. Well, yeah, you just wouldn't be able to. You would either stop traffic to turn left in, or you wouldn't allow the left-hand turn.
That would, the pros and cons of this, the pros is you're putting a lot of your parking demand on the street, which is a huge incentive to private development. It allows them to actually bring a whole lot more economic capacity to the corridor pretty quickly. The con is, I think that just may be too big of a leap to go from what is right now just a recovering highway, a highway in transition, to go from that to a commercial Main Street with diagonal parking. I think that may be too big of a leap.
Possibly. I mean, that's why, I've got like five or six alternatives.
Yeah.
Just to be able to have that discussion.
Right.
Now, this one, next one is pretty radical. It's a multi-way boulevard.
Okay,
And-
can I just say no right now?
Yeah.
No.
Because it's,
Except that you're the one who brought it up in the first place.
I know, but look, 142 feet, that's just too bloomin' big.
I've done a multi-way with 100-foot right of way.
Yeah, I know you can. This is just way, way big.
So if you actually look at the, so they modeled it in virtual reality, and
Yeah.
and if you look at it, you can actually see where it like cuts off the actual, the space where the buildings are. So it's pretty radical.
Yeah, it's too big.
Wow.
Well, let's do this. Don't discard anything just at first glance.
Okay.
And just keep it in play, and then, you know, you never know what might evolve.
But it's also basically the city has to acquire right of way to make that happen, so it's an expense.
Yeah.
Well, you know, there's a flip side to it as well, and that is that if you make something like this happen, it could be better enough for the businesses that they're saying, hey, this is in our best interest to give back to the city, let the city do, you know, create this. So it's ideally, and I've got some stuff I'm working on in another room as well, but ideally, that everything should hopefully be a swap. In other words, if you give us this, then we'll give you this in return, and we'll end up better. So if
Yeah.
you keep it in that sort of thing.
Okay, so then let's look at the outdoor room, the proportionality. For 142 feet,
Well, I mean, you have, basically what you have is really these trees that would be here are framing a narrower room. Otherwise, it does get really wide. I mean, it's what it is right now if you don't see that. So,
I could go over a couple of other things that, pros on that. The sidewalks and the trees, again, stay where they are. They serve as that median between the slip lane. So you would be adding a sidewalk and a tree and the building. The other thing is there are no buildings presently out there within this right-of-way taking. They're all set back 20 to 25 feet presently. And a lot of them are doing this lane in front already.
what that would do is that would transform some of those buildings that are the closest up from being just in the wrong place to being in the right place. So it,
I'm just also trying to think about the goal of getting to be able to get to built. And because of the cost of infrastructure and right-of-way acquisition, which I hear the aspiration is to get the swap, and we tried to do this very thing in Las Cruces recently, and instead of even considering the swap, now the city is in litigation. So, you know, I think it's an ideal thing if people can see the advantage, but I would say the ideal isn't always achieved.
Okay.
So, anyway, that's my 2 cents. What do you guys think?
I'm not hitting my no button, I'm hitting my maybe button. When it comes to road diets,
Yeah.
we still have to deal with concurrency and level of service and capacity, so putting on my city engineer hat, we would have to study before and after to see what the impacts are.
So
we're
what are
doing
your
that due
concurrency
diligence.
requirements?
Well, we have a citywide traffic model where we measure capacity and level of service, and development has to go through concurrency tests to make sure that there is that utility available. Either we provide capacity or If not, there's a de facto moratorium on development for not having that capacity, and
So-
they would have to increase capacity.
That's a great point, and I guess the next question for you, since a Main Street environment, which your comp plan required, or says you want to attain, since a Main Street's level of service should be E or below for successful retail, how would you go about reassigning, say, a few blocks of TIB to a different level of service attainment?
Well, this is where my city engineer can kick me if he wants, but one excellent resource is Federal Highways Road Diet Informational Guide. Just Google that, and there's all kinds of options and constraints and recommendations on how you can make road diets work and where they don't work. So if your intersections are running at high level of service and capacity, and you can shrink them in between with no impact on the intersection, then it probably would work. But if you test it and you shrink in between the intersection that doesn't work, then it's probably not a
But
good
what
idea.
about if the aspiration actually is to get to, and I know this is absolutely counterintuitive, but to get to level of service E, when maybe you're at B now? What if we want to slow it down geometrically? And I know that's basically a policy-based decision. What's the process for that? Do you have to take that to council?
Yes, that's not in the current plan and would be a change from our standards as.
From your transportation plan? Yeah, okay.
Not impossible, but it does require policy change.
How do you guys all feel about that from a regional perspective?
I think from a transit perspective, when we're talking about dropping down levels of service for general purpose traffic for the purpose of creating, a vibrant street and good retail usage, we want to. It'd be great to explore possibilities where there's transit priority, where there's potential right of way like bus lanes and bat lanes to keep the person throughput good and fast and reliable. And still kind of contributing to that retail feel and that vibrant street life, that sort of outdoor room.
So we noticed a lot of buses in West Seattle yesterday on our tour on California, and they seem to be performing just fine even at the scrambles.
Yeah, there's a rapid ride.
Yeah.
We just completed a long range planning effort where it's examining how current rapid, the idea of rapid ride is something that is not just kind of what we have out there now, but looking at how we can make it faster and more reliable to further differentiate it as a sort of a premium true bus rapid transit service. And part of that equation is certainly, and it's not every place in it, maybe I'm not as familiar as you guys with this particular corridor, but a big part of that is right of way. So we'd definitely be interested in, especially as, if you're saying it's 20,000 plus traffic there, and I don't anticipate going down.
That was the point I was gonna bring up is,
Yeah.
a challenge that we've got is this is still from the volumes fairly heavily traveled. It's a connection between the airport and East Marginal Way Boeing facilities down there. So, when we've talked about improvements on here in the past, it serves as a shortcut through there for a lot of through traffic, even though, I think we found that it's 20% or less, but there's still a lot of traffic on the roadway. But those folks, if we went to something more low volume, tried to make it more low volume in a downtown area, either you have to deal with those volumes or they have to go somewhere else, which means the freeway, 518, I-5, or even the other local streets that parallel 42nd or other streets. So it's, where does the traffic go? It's either you deal with it on the street or it's going to go somewhere else. And then, you're going to have some issues dealing with, probably WashDOT would probably not like that too much if we're going to start diverting more traffic onto the freeways, and then we ourselves wouldn't like it that much if we're going to divert traffic on 42nd and other streets. So it's, give or take there.
And one thing I think from our perspective to consider is what opportunity is there for a mode shift? So not reducing traffic and realizing that there's there's just the problem of vehicular traffic in there, converting some of those trips into transit trips, and what opportunities there might be there. We have pretty robust service on the corridor now, and in a recently adopted long-range plan by 2020, we're planning for that corridor, the current 124, to be converted to rapid ride, which is a host of other amenities, and that's also where that right of way conversation comes in too. So that, I mean, our interest would be how much can we shift that towards transit to get less single occupant vehicles out there, and what kind of opportunities do we have there?
Right. Sorry, Paul.
What are the right-of-way considerations?
Well, I mean, exclusive right-of-way is the preferred option, obviously, and whether that's some kind of combination of like a business access transit option or an exclusive right-of-way. Another sort of right-of-way consideration through any kind of say there is a bus lane, some kind of bulb out, so that right-of-way would be for some kind of passenger facility, which I mean, in my mind, kind of speaks to that outdoor living space, that it's a kind of transit as a part of the fabric of people's lives, to borrow Cotton's slogan, I think. But
It has a nice ring to it.
yeah, there you go. And so, I mean, from the right-of-way perspective, it would, ideally, exclusivity is the most reliable way, and particularly if you're talking about trying to entice people to shift to transit, that is sort of that provides the level of speed and reliability that can induce that mode shift.
What headways do you have on the corridor right now?
I don't know off the top of my head. The 124 and 128 combined together. I don't know off the top of my head.
Frequent though.
No.
I think 124s are in daytime, like rush hour time, is about 15-minute headways, and then a little bit less than that other times of day. And I think it's got good ridership, right?
Yes, and
Yeah.
it will be changing in the fall. It will start running. Its last trip of the day will continue down to SeaTac Airport as well. So that's just a change that's coming to it. Soon.
So on that quarter, I mean, considering it depends on your ridership may split between the 124 and 128, but yeah, fairly frequent. If you're saying 15, adding on top of that the frequency of the 128, fairly frequent service.
I see fire guys arrived.
Mm-hmm. Hey guys.
And one of our city councilmen.
Oh, wonderful, thank you. Okay.
All right. So then there's a couple of other alternatives to look at. This one is again an 86-foot right-of-way, keeping the curbs where they're at, keeping the median two-way left turn lane, one drive lane in each direction, a bike lane, and a parking lane. And again, if possible, moving the buildings up to the back of the sidewalk of future buildings. And then an alternative of that would be an separated bike lane. So this, you're just basically flipping the biking, or the bike lane and the parking lane, so that it's separated.
Is that with the curb as well? Did you say that? Is that
No,
with-
it's just the parked cars are between the bike lane and the travel lane.
If you had an actual curb there, it would be wider, you would require a wider space for it. You know,
You could
as
do
I
it.
have the separated bike
You
lanes,
could
that's
do
what I
that.
think about, you'd see with this
Mhm.
true separation.
Yeah.
Cycle track.
Yeah. Any comments on these two?
I would comment, I just recently looked at the design guidelines for bicycle facilities, and they actually don't recommend having the bike lane between parking and the curb. I'd have to go back and look at the reasons for that, but I just think we remember that they like it the other way around, where it's the parking up against the curb area.
Unless there's a buffer lane for
Well,
doors.
yeah, I think that, yeah, if somebody swings the door
Door.
open into the bike
Yeah.
lane, there's not, somebody's gonna,
It slows down the traffic, but not always in a good way.
just pointed that out.
I have a question. Why does the one with the, let's say, the third one from the top move 16,000 and the second one move 20,000 cars? What's the difference? Why would you get, I'm assuming that those numbers, 20 and 16, with
Yeah.
motor vehicles, why the swing?
It's because this is, for vehicles, they've got with the bike lane right next to them, they drive faster.
They have,
Right?
they perceive it as a wider lane
Yeah.
than if there's a parked car there.
Wow, okay. Thank you.
Or is that a median, in that third option down, is that a median? I see the notation, it says turn lane on that second option, I didn't notice that on the third. Is that a median or?
Oh, it's the same,
turn lane?
yeah.
Okay, same.
Yeah.
It's a median with turn pockets. where-
Pretty much what's out there now.
I mean, so with these higher speeds, because of the bike lane being next to the driving lane in the second option, I mean, is the danger or the perception of danger higher? I mean, are there actually greater incidents of accidents in that kind of setup?
It's probably more dangerous. I mean, your
To the
your
bike
accidents
side.
would be
Right.
higher injury or more, more critical injuries at a higher speed.
You know, the other thing around bicycle infrastructure is that in this area over the last 10 years, there has been such innovation done by cities that guidebooks and standards just haven't been able to keep up. You've got innovations happening in Seattle, Chicago, Washington, Boston, New York, where different cities are trying different configurations of what works best. So absolutely, I completely understand your guide of where, maybe it needs to be this way versus that way. But if the guide was printed 2 years ago, it was written 4 years ago, and there has been tremendous innovation on it. It's just, it comes down to what works best for you all and what can be designed to maximize the safety for the biker. And I say this as a biker, so I'll own my bit. As well as kind of what works best for the cars and the surrounding land uses. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. I haven't seen an area of such innovation in biking in this field for a long time.
It's true. I was gonna ask which standard you were referring to.
AASHTO.
The AASHTO? Yeah.
And so they said that the danger is greater with the bike lane being is the curb between the parking
Yeah, I
lot?
think if the door opens.
From the passenger side?
Yeah,
Well, the door,
Well, 'cause
but if
now-
they're on the other side, they can be doored by the driver.
well,
Usually now when
Okay.
they're built, because that was a problem with the first generation, now when you have sidewalk, bike lane, and parking, it's separated by, what are those dummy things that can go?
the difference that I see clearly between those two is if the bike lane is on the outside of the park, you can veer around and go out into the lane. You can't, you're gonna hit a curb on the other side, so I think that's the biggest danger. You don't have anywhere to go and recover.
Have you tried the bike lane on the other side of the tree, or are they always on the street?
They're always, well,
No, not always. Seattle actually has some nice examples of bike lanes that are, is it Seattle? No, it's Boston. Has some really nice examples of some bike lanes. I'm a bike lane freak. That are adjacent to the sidewalk, and that causes problems because where the bikers go, where the pedestrians go, and then you have the dog walkers.
Or if it's still
And
a
whatnot.
level difference, but the tree is on the other side of it.
well, the problem with that is the cost of the infrastructure change.
Yeah.
Because you already have, he was being really careful not to move your curbs and your trees.
Yeah. So it's just, this is the kind of the growth and the.
So the 7 feet for the bike lane seems generous to the point. I mean, that even if a door opens, in the sense of being able to get around it, say a door opens 3 or 4 feet wide, I mean, that still provides 3 or 4 feet for the bike to navigate.
Right.
Yeah, you could, I mean, with that right of way, you could put in a buffer and still have.
Yeah, you
have
could
a-
have a protected cycle track.
That's what I was trying to.
Yeah.
Or a buffer there as well.
Pylon.
Yeah.
Is it two ways?
One,
No, it's one way on either
One
side.
way on either
One way.
side.
Yeah,
Some
7
type of
feet,
a-
that's your norm.
Yeah.
From a policy standpoint, I don't think we want to do anything that forces more traffic onto 42nd. That's a heavily used road by kids going to and from school. Now, we have theoretically sidewalks, but
And there are sections that are substandard, phase 4 of 42nd from 139th north to East Marginal is 24 feet of pavement with fog line at edge of pavement and ditch and whatnot.
So a topic came up, speaking of that policy and the business meeting this morning, that I thought was a really good point, and Paul's alluded to it already, and that's the huge size of your blocks, your existing blocks, the 660 by 1300. And so the point was made that, you know, how can you get greater permeability or smaller block size, because then that really helps accommodate traffic overflow, and it makes so that you have two major north-souths right now, and they're, you know, it's pretty fragile, the balance between the two. And so if we can add over time as development happens, if we can give enough incentive to develop, but say in return for the development on the following grid that we would align to parcels, that if this parcel develops, they have to give right-of-way. So eventually the city would acquire enough to develop a secondary north-south street between 42nd and TIB, and then also on the west side. So then that begins to give you a backstop for congestion.
We currently do that down at the urban center, we'll ask for a half street when
Yeah.
the development's of significant enough size that you need some more mitigation.
Right.
Another question about that is it the amount of traffic on 142nd, or is it the character of the traffic? And if you have a lot of cars going 20 miles an hour, that's pretty safe. But if you have a few cars going 35, that's quite dangerous.
well, we have a little bit of everything, I would say, from my own experience. One of the things that's changed is the number of people driving their kids to and from school. I mean, it seems like almost everybody does it. So at that time of day, we have a tremendous number of parents, and they drive slower, taking their kids to and from school. It seems to me. We do have rush hour traffic, people getting a little later, people going to and from work there. But I don't think there's, how close, what is it, do you know what the traffic load on 42nd is right now?
Can you get that for the new signal? We have a new traffic signal that's going to be constructed at 42nd and 144th, so I imagine we have some data for that signal, make sure that
We
it's
do.
warranted.
I honestly haven't looked at it for a while. I could speculate that it's 7,500 to 10,000 at most.
But there's the peak at school time.
Correct, and we do have a school zone on the roadway, so it reduces to 20 miles an hour through that, which is with children present.
Not even remotely honored.
Yeah.
How far back would this new street, new north-south street, to actually benefit the traffic on, offload the traffic on TIB, how far back would it have to be? Could it be?
I would try to split the difference between TIB and 42nd. So if we could get a north-south between the two, you know, in the best of all possible worlds, a really good regional block size. What's the average block size in Seattle? Like 350? 300? So the 300-foot block is just a really great urban block in most cities in the western US.
It'd be interesting to lay one in on a map and see what it impacts.
It's shaped,
I mean, I would-
Yeah,
so that, sort of a pie shape.
it's a pie shape. Right. But you could do a
So
parallel
you,
one another.
you, right through it like that, yeah.
You know, one other idea is if you created a new street along the line between the higher density zones and the single family, then that
Yeah.
becomes a nice separation.
So
for
tighter.
lower
Right.
density.
Yeah,
For
really
the
nice.
Transition, exactly. And then you get this half street from the higher density stuff that
Right.
develops.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So
Sorry, Paul.
one of the things we would often do is say, would you put a green tag or a red tag on these? And you might think about which ones you like the best and which ones you hate the most.
Need a yellow tag.
Okay, so from an implementation of your comprehensive plan perspective, just sheerly looking at the urban room, the creation of a place that can be an economic engine for the city, while being a place where you can actually, it's inviting to higher density residential and to more creative retail uses. The second one from the top is if that bike lane were protected, that would be the one that I would say would most likely, this guy, would most likely give you that place-making potential. And I know there's other things to consider, but just,
And it's mostly just paint.
it is,
Right.
right now, it's the cheapest one to implement too.
Why is the median 10 foot? I'm just,
That's the existing.
That's the existing width. It's actually part of a 12-foot centered, when it turns into a turn lane, but, so that the edge of the median isn't right up against the lane, we bring it in a foot on each side, so it's 10 foot and what is virtually 12 foot.
Curb to curb, it's 10.
Curb, yeah.
The stripes are.
Take a foot or shy distance
Yeah.
on both sides.
okay, I'm just asking, and what purpose does the median serve?
Well, it's out there presently. It's largely a two-way left turn lane, and it's because of all the driveways. Largely, you would you would prefer to have shorter blocks, so that there would be intersections every 300 or 400 feet, and no driveways. Basically, people would turn at the intersection and park behind. Yeah.
And if you had that second layer of another thoroughfare behind, if you had a way to get into the parcels from a secondary street, then you could really do some access management along the boulevard. Another thing to think about from Metro's perspective is that 12-foot median is basically also a placeholder for BRT. You know, it could be.
I mean, one thing from our perspective too is that, you know, realizing that it's trying to we're all fighting over the kind of the same right of way and trying to figure out a solution that works for everybody. One thing from our perspective I think is to consider is that when we're adding this bike infrastructure or in these concepts that include bike infrastructure, if there's instances where we're looking for transit to, even if it doesn't have exclusive right of way, to potentially have few jumps at signals to kind of get transit to have a head start. How we integrate that bike infrastructure and those queue jumps would definitely be something to just consider, I think.
Right, because you would be dropping the parking at the intersection, so you'd have more room to work with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems like the bike lanes are gonna be really important, especially as you start to make these mode shifts and people take their bikes to the light rail station from outside the area and then wanna bike home or bike to their shop or bike to their working place of employment. That providing a safe space for them is gonna be important, and it seems like we've heard from the community too, that they wanna have safer places to ride.
And it seems to me, I mean, if you're talking about, planning for a future that has high density development that's increasing this corridor and the concern of not wanting to add more vehicle traffic on 42nd and trying to, maintain essentially status quo of how your vehicle throughput through there or reducing it, how you're accommodating for that increment of extra people that are coming there, maybe how we as a group and agencies and how we're focusing our attention is how to accommodate that incremental growth, and maybe kind of getting on the same page about that is useful. If the community is speaking about bikes as being a component of that, from our perspective, trying to figure out how transit is a part of that for a lot of folks. Making that maybe some agreement on that at the outset could be helpful.
Right.
So any
we're
other?
moving people, we're trying to move people, not just cars.
Yeah.
Right. And so that mode percentages should shift around if things are being done right.
And figure out how the freight equation deals into that. I mean, there's if that connection exists and we're not seeing it go away, kind of acknowledging that it does exist and figuring out how it can, we can accommodate it in a way that still works for the community.
Yeah, I haven't checked to see, I assume it's some sort of a freight route, and I'd have to look at the map to see if it's actually designated freight. I'd be kind of curious to hear from the fire department, and I think I know the answer to this.
Chief, what do you think?
But in the discussion of going from a multi-lane facility where you've got, if there's an emergency you're responding to, and you've got 2 lanes in each direction, most people pull over and you can go in the other lane. Going to the, 1 lane in each direction or 1 lane in a center turn lane, now if there's any kind of a backup, you're forced to 3rd lane or do something. And
Right,
there's
I mean,
curves too.
that's one of the main purposes of that center lane, the double left turn lane is it's called, that we can fall into that and get around traffic.
So if there was a median there, that would create a problem.
Well, of course it would. I mean, like on South Center Boulevard, right, Bob?
That's right, legacy, 1 lane each way with wall down the middle.
Right.
It's great access management, and not good emergency response.
So what about a rumble strip sort of thing in the center lane? So it keeps,
Mountable.
yeah,
Mountable curve.
it keeps the general traffic out of it, but you guys.
Not a
can-
hard curve,
yeah,
but just,
right,
yeah, I mean, those are, you see those all over the country,
yeah.
and that is an option.
Suzanne, sorry, is that median, is that assuming a hard curve or is that just a striped median? Is that a striped turn lane or is there a hard curve?
And what I had envisioned was no change to what's out there now in that center lane. So there's pieces of median, and the rest of it is 2-way left turn lane. Now, as buildings, if the code requires buildings to come up to the sidewalk and the driveways start going away, then you have less need for the 2-way left turn lane, and then you can repurpose some of that.
How many of our buildings that we have there now that are dependent on driveways would we really want to keep?
Some have access in the rear and back side of the buildings, not just the front side.
Mm-hmm.
But some
I
have
can't
side
think
street
of
driveway.
many of those buildings that are really worthwhile keeping, they're so old and.
I think when we were going through the design process, virtually every business or property that has a driveway usually wants to keep it, so you're fighting with them about whether or not you can take it away. So most of them want to keep it.
The alternative is to, once again, through negotiation and acquisition, is to add the rear alley option for access, which really takes a lot of the conflict off of, and really the danger, the opportunity for pedestrian and vehicular and cyclist conflicts off of the boulevard, and it basically gives you a driveway in the back. And it gives emergency another opportunity to address a situation. Dedicated emergency access.
To go from let's say the second one from the top was wave a magic wand, and that's what the road looked like today out there with the new striping in one of the middle blocks. And at some point then it has to integrate to the 2 lanes each direction. What does it take at those points where it's connected to the 2 lanes each direction with no on-street parking and all that stuff? How does that transition happen?
Yeah, but it wouldn't be too difficult. I mean, it would have to be designed, but you're basically dropping the parking and picking up the driveway. So it can happen pretty quickly.
That's an interesting comment, because on the downstream end, it would open up and traffic would be fine, but going into it, going from 2 lanes to 1, obviously would create a bottleneck if you got no traffic, so.
You would be deliberately slowing traffic at a point where you're wanting them to engage with the community.
Are there ways to do that safely?
Oh yeah, it happens at an intersection. So, and it's usually a signalized intersection, hopefully.
I'll tell you something else. I did some work in Lancaster, California, and they had a 4-lane arterial through a retail section, 55 miles an hour, which is what cars were going through. So they did significant streetscape improvements. They invested about $13 million, and they brought it to 1 lane. So you had 4 lanes going into essentially 2 lanes. And the median for the emergency fire was essentially parking, and it was kind of done very interestingly. No bottlenecks. The residents loved it, the retailers loved it, but for the city council person, that streetscape improvement attracted over $300 million in private investment. I mean, it was just, they just narrowed the street, they created the environment for that placemaking, and the private investment just came. And you guys having a tremendous asset with the link rail station right there.
What about the bike infrastructure on either end? What is it going to connect to? Or have you looked at that?
That's a problem, because what we heard last night was biking on the boulevard is taking your life in your own hands. And so if we start adding bike lanes, only kind of I mean, you're putting cyclists at, hopefully you're doing it at an intersection where you have the option to get off and go on a parallel route, but that is a potential, but people are on it already.
Outside of this addition, you'd be whatever you've got now.
Right, we do have a walk and roll plan that's a bike plan, so you can see where it connects.
The 2 big issues I would see there on either end is obviously the South Center crossing to get to the light rail station if you're on a bike, and the Triangle Junction where military meets TIB is going to be scary going through there on a bike. The other issue is topography on the north end. I mean, you're going to get cooking on a bike once you get over the hump and you start going down the hill, or you're going to be working to get up that bike lane. So if you've got, say, I'm just thinking of like the corridor where you have a bike lane next to the driving lane, and then everyone starts going fast as they get into that downhill part, it just becomes a little bit riskier. And then on the other side, you've got people going 2 miles an hour going up the hill until you get to that flatter part of TIB. So that middle area is gonna be great for bike corridor, but I think you're gonna have people scared to get to it on either end, or just hesitant to because of it.
Mhm.
That's gonna.
And also east or west, because there's hills to the east to
Yeah.
get up to TIB.
Yeah, coming from 42nd.
42nd, that's pretty steep.
What's the flattest transition? Is it north or south to get from 42nd to TIB?
The flattest transition is probably, I mean, coming from 42nd to TIB by
Yeah.
the school is probably the easiest, where the Tukwila Village is.
Then
Yeah,
library.
yeah, Tukwila Village.
Yeah, it gets steeper on both.
So if this went from 142nd to, say, 146th at least.
The real 50s.
Yeah, no, probably when you probably, I mean, if you, well, I don't know, it's just a paint job. So you could do the whole thing.
Or you could have a connect.
Yeah, I mean, from 142nd,
Like, yeah.
I mean, it'd be like, I would discourage, just thinking in my mind, going any further north than 142nd with
Yeah.
this, and then bringing it over to 42nd, because the connection, you can get off at Tukwila Village and you get to 42nd, and that's where 42nd and TIB are closest.
Right.
42nd and TIB start to split. When you go south, 42nd goes downhill
Right.
and moves away from the TIB corridor, whereas TIB stays flat and gets to the
Right.
light rail station.
Okay, yeah, that sounds like a strategy.
And CTAC does have some development we're planning right in that triangle area.
Joe, can you talk just a little bit about what you're planning there?
Well, that whole area, we have a station area development plan where we're gonna be closing off that little section of military between TIB and 152nd.
Between TIB and
152nd Street.
The
We
east-west.
actually just got our consultant on board for designing that project, so we're well on our way to doing that.
That one.
Yeah, in front of the pancake shop. Well, that section, that whole area is going to turn into a pedestrian-friendly, multi-use, mixed-use, commercial, residential.
Between
type of area.
152nd and 154th?
Yes, yeah, that area.
Great.
And then military, between 152nd and 150th, we're putting in bike lanes to the, and 152nd between IB and military. We're also putting in sidewalk lanes. So that little area is
Yeah.
going to get
Nice.
reconstructed. Hopefully, we're shooting for 2018 construction, but it probably is with our right-of-way issues.
Do you guys have a plan you could share?
We have a station area plan, which is, it's pretty comprehensive. That
You
was
guys should actually have that.
2006.
Oh, yeah, we have,
Yeah.
that's on their,
Yep.
their
On that
thing,
SharePoint?
yeah.
I have an RFQ that I could share of the actual project that's going to be designed here starting next month.
Oh, great. So you've selected, okay,
Yes,
excellent.
we just selected yesterday.
Right now, by the way, military is just absolutely standing still going northbound. Just FYI.
So I've got a question. Something we've heard from a lot of the consultants that we've heard from over the course of the last couple of years when we've been doing the comprehensive planning effort was that if we didn't make any kind of changes to the street cross-section, that it wouldn't become a main street and that we shouldn't bother even considering bringing the buildings to the back of sidewalk.
I agree.
And so I guess that's part of what I want to ask here is just, is this something that we have to do if we want to achieve that vision? It's not really a question
Yeah.
of whether or not we want to do it.
Yeah, there's no option if you want, if council, if the elected officials absolutely are committed to the comprehensive plan, the vision is crystal clear. I mean, you guys wrote it so coherently and so,
If it's coherent, we didn't write it.
no, it really is, it's absolutely crystal clear vision. And it explicitly calls for a diverse, economically viable, authentic, mixed-use, walkable Main Street. And, you know, for all those things to work together, you can't have a suburban arterial. There's a mix. I mean, there's a misfit between the infrastructure and the vision. And until you begin to, it's the public-private partnership thing until the civic entity, the municipal body provides the infrastructure, the private sector can't build the parcels that you all are envisioning. They will not survive on a suburban arterial. You cannot pull a mixed-use building to the back of the sidewalk and it have any degree of success without the teaser parking in front. It just won't work.
So my follow-up question to that then is, if we're not considering, it's what we've heard, we're not going to make the entire TIB corridor our Main Street, that it's really going to be a segment of that. And so is this thing, is changing a cross-section to one of these possible to do on a much smaller scale and still have it, as you were talking about earlier, spreading out to more of a 2-lane in each direction? So we can consider a 4 or 5 or 6 block stretch or something like that.
In fact, I was going to ask which 2 or 3 blocks do you think is most appropriate for this? Because that's like almost 2,000 feet. 3 blocks is 1,900 feet.
Can I ask another quick, probably dumb question, but why do the bike lanes have to be on TIB? Yeah, what happens if we build another road or something? And then should we get more parking or some advantage out of?
You could go back to the diagonal.
To the diagonal, yeah.
You could. It's just if you can convince your engineer and public works director and fire marshal that it's really, really important. But they all have very technical requirements that they are mandated to perform, that the diagonal parking can make them very uncomfortable.
Can that be phased over time, so you have your bike lanes on TIB until you get your back streets where you put your bike lanes, and then your everything is slowed down by that point on TIB, and so you can do your diagonal parking?
And if the bike lanes are gone, the diagonal parking could be deeper, so backing out wouldn't be near as exciting if you were backing right out into the lane, right?
And you know, the current best practice is you do back in and head out because you can see a lot better.
To play devil's advocate, or angel's advocate, because I'm in support of it, I guess, the bike lane, where would it go if it's not on TIB?
Well, they were talking about if you create that back street, the new street kind of running north-south.
I guess I'm thinking of connecting, from the light rail, that, because, we get that situation where TIB curves, like, for example, just like, thank you, 42nd comes and it gets further away and then goes down the hill here. Even if you cut it in half, it'll get closer to here, but that bike lane that infrastructure will continue to move away from TIB. So that it just seems in my mind, no matter what, if you don't have it on TIB, you'll be making bikes do this in some way or another and contending with topography a little bit more. So it's like a challenge, at least in my mind, of how you would not have it there.
How realistic do you think it is that you can get another street in?
That's a 20-year plan.
It seems like that's gonna take a long time.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah, that's a long-term plan.
So if the city did say we want to stick to the vision as it's written, and if the city did say we acknowledge that to do that and become like a Main Street and all that, we would have to adopt, say, the next page, that one option, that second option that had, just as an example, and that was for a few blocks, say 4 blocks in the middle, so say from 142nd to 146 or 48, something like that. To meet the safety standards, right? So like, to make those changes and meet safety, just the safety issues, what would it take for us to meet the warrants, whatever it is, to meet the safety standards in order to do that? What's that?
A miracle.
Really?
Just good old-fashioned engineering analysis on what it would take to design it, install it, so that it's documented, just for liability and concurrency, which is capacity and level service.
I mean, one way of looking at the existing is that it's actually dangerous by design, because you know, the crossing distances are too long. The cars are moving too fast, just because no matter what signs you put up there, they're going to go 35 or greater when they can. And people, pedestrians and bikes die when they're hit by a car going that fast. So safety-wise, if you can slow the vehicles down while maintaining the capacity, that's sort of your holy grail.
So would it take, though, any new infrastructure other than just repainting? So for instance, would it require traffic signals in order to be able to do that and to justify it?
Well, that's sort of a that's sort of another diagram in terms of pedestrian crossings. They're horrible out there. I mean, the public have said it. You look at it, there's a stretch here that's 2,500 feet between pedestrian crossings, between crossings.
No, there's not. They cross a lot in it.
Approved crosswalks.
They run.
It's so dangerous.
You have jaywalking, then you have unmarked crosswalks, and then there's a few signalized.
I mean, the rule of thumb, if you want a walkable area, is pedestrian crossings every 300 or 400 feet. Yeah.
So even if you have the super blocks like you guys have, you should be having the mid-block crossings.
Question on the bike lane, if the intent, at least initially, is to do this in a 4-block area, would the bike lane continue on beyond that? I mean, would there be that much utility in having a 4-block bike lane if it didn't connect anything on either side, on the north and south side?
It's a phased bike lane.
Yeah.
So with the intent, I mean, hopefully that, you know, in a 5 to 7 year span, you're going to have enough activity that results from the infrastructure, or the paint investment, that that there'll be, that it will, we'll see the implementation of the vision and it will expand south. Because it is a pretty cheap, from a municipal perspective, paint is about the cheapest investment you can make.
I would add, as far as the bike lanes, we have bike lanes on South 144th to the west. We will be building them between 42nd and
Between military and.
so 144th is going to have bike lanes, so it's a connection point
Perfect.
right
Yeah.
now. It really
Yeah,
is.
it's a connection.
Yeah.
I mean, there's gotta be other.
You have to get out of it.
It's not just gonna be the 4 blocks,
Okay,
it
so
connects to.
Just to gather into whatever there, you at least need to go east on bike lane.
Facilitates the
Correct.
last
Yeah.
mile, the last 2 miles. The council person said about all the parents driving to
Yeah.
school, could we?
You could connect it to the
you
school
could-
cross street.
Yeah, it would be a more comprehensive kind of layer.
Do you guys have a bike plan, master plan?
And refer to the walk
Yeah.
and roll on maintenance plan.
So we'll refer to that, and that may be where you select the blocks as a logical location that ties into your site network.
Yeah, and the destinations
Yeah.
like the school,
The school.
metro,
Safe routes to
residential.
school and
Yeah.
everything else.
There's some trails that Rose showed me that worked out, anyway.
Okay, so here's a question, because you've all been incredibly, one of two things, either very, very quiet or very, very congenial, which, does that, and my question for you, and please be honest, does this mean that once we leave town on Sunday that, you know, you're gonna say that was a ridiculous
guys will
idea
whack
and
off.
throw it up, dump it in the trash can? I mean, really, what are your thoughts on it?
I can go get Councilmember Duffy.
I don't know what that means.
I have another way.
Oh,
I have another way of asking it. So you have a comp plan that says, make this a main street. And you asked us to come here to help you make it a main street. I've drawn 5 different ways where it could become a main street.
and that's
do
the
none-
best one.
Do none of them work? Do you have a better idea? Could there be a modification of one? Or is it just pie in the sky to even do a main street? Is it just not feasible?
Well, the problem, no, it's not, we want a main street. The problem is, if that traffic is on it now, is going to continue, or even grow, the north-south traffic, we don't necessarily want it on 42nd, okay? And it's not gonna jump to Military, so that becomes a problem, because I don't think there's any desire to load up that street a whole lot more. And that hadn't even occurred to me. So that's an issue. So that needs to be dealt with somehow. Keeping it 2 or 4 lanes doesn't make sense. Okay, it's not a main street. So we have a problem to figure out how to solve, right? But on the other hand, we don't have a whole lot of high cost development on either side of it right now. So we have a lot more flexibility than I would assume a lot of jurisdictions have in what we do. I don't know, but let's think through it.
So I would go back to my no button that says, if you can demonstrate that your signalized intersections, existing or future, operate at a good level of service and capacity, then what happens in between is irrelevant.
So talk more about that, Bob.
So that gets back to taking what's out there and pinching it down in between. But if you still have capacity at the intersections, then you're still getting your throughput, your level of service.
So how about,
That's
let's
the
take level
bottleneck
of
is
service.
intersections.
Let's take
Not
level
the-
of service out
So-
and just talk about capacity, but
Yeah.
because capacity is perfect, and we know that's critical. But if we can have it going slower so it's safer, or how can we redefine the level of service acceptability for the Main Street portion?
Well, intuitively, if you slow traffic down to keep the same level of service, you need more lanes, which is counterintuitive to this whole
Well,
thing.
but
so.
they stack tighter when they're going slower. So you actually you don't reduce capacity until you really slow it down.
It's kind of like a reverse speed study. And
Yeah.
what I mean by that is, we'll go out there and do speed studies to see what is the 85th percentile speed, which is you're reacting to development. Another way to do it is to slow down traffic and then measure it, or reduce the speed limit and then measure it. So there's more than one way to get there.
Is there another measurement tool that you would suggest?
We actually.
Congeniality?
Yeah, how nice people are. No. You know, instead of LOS, we really like to talk about a reduction of VMT. You know, and if you can do trip capture and begin to get people to do mode share, you know, options. And we think that looking at traffic holistically rather than just by LOS, you know, it has lots of economic and sustainability implications that go beyond just sheer speed moving
Like,
through an
Well,
intersection.
What if you did
Ray
an
didn't use-
LOS for pedestrians on this corridor?
We actually, didn't we start to do a study like that? We were trying to incorporate bicycle, pedestrian and.
Multimodal level of
Yeah.
service,
And actually, the best main streets in the world, in terms of the most profitable, the most vibrant, all the standards of what people say they want, they're typically between level of service C and D, somewhere in that range.
And Gibbs wants F.
Do I?
Gibbs wants F.
Well, F is just it's a parking lot.
Well,
That's no limit at all. But
Well, as Councilmember Robertson said, we could look at different things. One thing maybe we should be looking at too is, well, if the traffic is slowing, how much traffic will choose to divert themselves, but not on 42nd Street, but on 518 to I-5 or 518 to 599 and those, or is there traffic already coming through that's basically taking a shortcut from Boeing Access Road to the airport that they might decide not to take that shortcut, it'll be quicker. I don't know what that number is.
Don't your studies say most of your traffic on TIB is local?
Yes, and I thought about that when I mentioned it, because it was such a really long O&D study going from around the north end of the project down by 599 up to 152nd. There weren't that many trips that made it through. That's the low number, 20% or less. But there were a lot of trips that were probably being generated in this area coming out to the side streets. So maybe they were going most of the way through. But and I think that's what we found is that the great majority of the trips were coming up through here and originating, or dispersing out onto the side streets somewhere in this vicinity. So they may be doing 80% of the trip through there, but it was a long O&D study, really.
If going back to that capacity question, because that's kind of and thinking about the multimodal level of service. I think it's an important question because you're right now at one end of the spectrum. When you're trying to get person throughput rather than vehicle throughput, if you're thinking about person throughput, you're about as far over to the car side as you can get. So it's trying to optimize how many people you can get through and to this corridor as you can through this design exercise. So and that's the way I kind of frame this in my head, and also trying to leverage that big investment, the link station. That's something that not every community has, and communities are trying to get. So to the level that you can improve that person throughput, whether that's through bike, whether it's through cars and accommodating it some way, and through transit, my preference. Essentially, that's the design problem, right? You're increasing person capacity through there, and how to accommodate that seems to be the.
And actually, that's a great point. Where we're also instead of just throughput, we're also from the economic development perspective, we're also trying to do throughput. Yes, exactly. We're trying to create a destination.
And if your goal is to create a walkable neighborhood, getting people there clearly is that's really
that's
the
critical.
challenge.
It just seems like all the desirable neighborhoods have a configuration like something like that. And, I think we would love to see the image improvement that Columbia City went through years ago. We'd love to see how Columbia City became more desirable. Now it's expensive and people can't, people are talking about, and it's like, we have, a much bigger street, and I'll bet they're moving more traffic, or as much as traffic as we are. It'd be interesting to look at their safety. Maybe they have less safety or something, but
Is there a
it seems like
way-
all these neighborhoods have something, and somehow Tukwila can't seem to get there. But this neighborhood can turn into a great neighborhood, but somehow we've got to get over this issue.
And really it can start with little paint. So can you get traffic counts for California?
It's on the Seattle's website.
It
City of
is.
Seattle has all their traffic counts on their website for 2014. 2014 data.
And Rainier, that would be great. Okay.
How about the accident rate?
I don't know.
On TIB, do you have accident rates?
Can we do the speed study?
Is it a speed study?
Yeah, so the KPG memo that Mauro sent out has accident history. That was good.
Okay. We have that.
Okay.
Or,
Oh, good.
We reduced the speed limit from 40 to 35 from 139 to 156 5 years ago or so, based on that study. Where it reacted to the speed limit.
so, is there anyone present? You don't have to be a show of hands necessarily, but is there anyone present who will actively try to, who actively wants to oppose either number 2 or number 3? And I'm especially looking at you two with the no buttons.
It's a maybe button now.
Okay.
I'm with Bob on this, is that, we'd like to see something like this happen. It's just how do you make it work without totally messing up traffic, being able to move enough traffic to make where everybody's happy. Because, what we don't want is gridlock that what did you guys do? You went from 4 lanes down to 2 lanes and nobody can get through. Maybe you're fielding calls all day. So if we can move traffic, then
Yeah, if we can demonstrate that we're not putting all the traffic on to 42nd to the east and 37th to the west, where we're not adversely impacting the residential neighborhoods, the intersections operate with a reasonable level of service, whether it's C, D, F, or G, then I think we can get there and just document the design decision so that we're not hanging out there for liability.
Right.
Having just spoken with a attorney regarding court claims, that's always in our mind.
And so from a council perspective, and I know it's hard to read the minds of your colleagues, but
Yeah.
does this seem like a proposition that would have any support?
I think this is what most of them are kind of thinking of in the first place,
Yeah.
yeah. It's 2 lanes,
Right.
and with parking, and everybody likes bicycles. Like I said, the only thing that is if we do something that changes the traffic and moves a lot of traffic to 42nd, then we've got some interstate problems. Say, if we had a lot more housing there, which is the plan, we're generating more traffic too, right? Is that significant, just out of curiosity?
Well, that's back to the mode share issue, and if you can, with being so close to the station,
Big opportunity.
it is a tremendous opportunity to add people and, yeah.
And if you reduce parking.
Yeah, if you reduce the parking standards so you're not giving so much space up to cars, then you're incentivizing people to use transit.
The cautionary tale there is the type of housing. So
Right.
research has shown that if it's higher end luxury, even though it's next to a link, you won't have the mode share. But if it's more, I hate to use the word affordable housing, but if it's geared for more workforce housing, such as your firemen, as a for example, the librarians, the teachers, that.
They'll use the public transit.
That's what the research is showing.
We're not likely to get to high end no matter what we do there, at least
In the near term.
yeah.
But my point was, it's just not a blanket statement. Housing by
Okay.
transit doesn't necessarily do the reduction in your average trips per day. It depends on the type of housing.
I think what we heard this morning from Lori Volt about the housing specialist was that that's the kind of housing that we would probably get here, is that
Yeah.
the the housing that's for the work, everybody, not
Yes,
the luxury,
Yeah,
the townhouses.
yeah,
Hey Susan,
yeah.
I haven't been in all the meetings, so I don't know if this has been discussed, but on the liability issue, has there been any discussion of the joint ITE and CNU design manual for context?
I was
based?
kind of surprised that Paul didn't mention it, but I'm on a, I was already loud enough.
Go for it.
Talk. So it's a recommended practice that Federal Highways has approved. CNU worked with ITE, the Institute for Transportation Engineers, to come up with context-sensitive design solutions. So it's a alternative to the green book, if I'm getting this right.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm not an engineer, I play one. And it was adopted by a number of states as, again, as an alternative. So if for folks in your position, particularly given the liability, you can go to these design, the ITE, CNU design standards, or
So that's not referenced in here, but it does talk about combining complete streets with context-sensitive
That's
solutions.
it.
So,
Yeah.
once again, with an engineering analysis that documents those things, it could be
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
compromise.
Right.
it was, I'm so glad you brought it up, Steve, because I was like, damn, I wish I brought the book. But, Paul knows it, I'm sure he's even used it before. And we're working on a second version now with ITE to put in tighter engineering standards.
And
NACTO has
yeah, has
endorsed
some
that
really great,
as
yeah.
well.
I was actually involved in the development of the idea in a small way, but that was one of the big goals, is to give you guys something to hang your hat on, precisely because of liability purposes. We can say, no, look, this is not some wacko thing they came up with. Here's the standard for walkable places.
Yeah, if we can take our fingerprints off of the decision and it's documented, then we won't be
Yeah.
going through deposition after deposition,
Right.
which is a good thing.
Yeah, just use that.
Yes.
I know I'm a planner, but I'm just thinking reality. The question I have is, with these preferred concepts, we are in the process of approved a concept for Tupelo Village already fronting TIB. Could we take those concepts you had here and say, okay, if you take these options, here's what the difference would be? Because that's a real life civil engineering preliminary plan is done for Tupelo Village, that frontage. What I would like to see then, these concepts, and if you could do a quick drawing saying, here's what's currently there in front of what the building 2 is, the one I showed you. Here's what it would look like if we applied these techniques. Because that,
Pretty easy.
I
You would-
agree, but I
you
think it would help
you would
us.
just use that, that frontage.
Right, and then it would help
not
us,
the other one.
because then we may want to, since they haven't done the work yet for that site, we might want to talk with us as the property owner and the developer, say, do we want to try this technique right in front of it?
Right.
That's a great option, because actually that's the location where it should start. Because as was mentioned by the counselor, with the bike, or one of you guys, the safe routes to schools with the bikes, being able to get the cross street to 42nd. It's a perfect location.
And related to that, in previous lives also be a transit planner, how would you show in your example where then the bus stops would be?
There, we'd start to get into
The plan.
the plan and a strip map and, the details.
Okay.
And we can also provide, I think just recently, in the last month or week, completed a speed and reliability toolkit, which gives several examples of things that our engineers have put together, engineers and planners. Because I'm curious about looking at it from a cross section, and saying, let's neck this down from 4 to 2. That's a good neighborhood feel. And supports pedestrian and bike use, which all our customers are at the end of or beginning of their trip. So we obviously are very supportive of that. But getting a sense of what happens at those intersections to get at that, maintaining that person throughput and two-put. A big component of that is getting the efficiency that transit can provide through there, and making sure that if we're trying to convert some of those trips from vehicle trips to other kinds of trips, that we're optimizing transit flow that works well with what you guys are trying to do on this main street. That would, I think, from our point of view, be a big interest to see how we can, you know, make transit go smoothly and quickly and reliably. It's a major transit corridor, and you know that plan I was talking about earlier. I was just looking at that, and we're projecting in 2040 to have between 20 and 30,000 boardings per day at the link station. So, yeah, so that and to get there is kind of things like this, trying to make sure that we can get there efficiently.
All going north, or because there's the bus rapid transit that also goes.
Well, that'd be total for the
east-west.
station. Total for the station, yeah.
So, are you proposing BRT for this corridor?
That's what's included in our long range plan for the 2040 vision. Would be a conversion of something similar to a similar alignment and serving similar markets to I believe the 124.
So let me ask the chief, could you do some sort of a share of the center lane? I mean, can the bus get out of the way for emergency if that's dedicated?
I would have to talk to somebody that knows a little more about it, to be honest.
Yeah, likewise, we have to look at that,
Yeah.
and see what best practices are on that. This isn't the only design in America that follows this.
Right, exactly.
I mean, just from my travels around, I've seen many, main streets that have been converted.
Right.
And the flow of traffic works.
Yeah.
You know, that right lane is a right turn lane, and it goes to one lane quite easily.
Right.
And it does. It revitalizes areas, which I envision that happening here.
See, now, this is the kind of fire marshal we need to, you need to hire him to come and speak for CNU.
He's the fire chief.
Chief, sorry, sorry. That is, see?
But you know, we changed, the code got changed a year ago. The international.
Oh, fire code?
Yeah, fire code got changed.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We actually, there was
We should
a
take that.
fire chief in, I know we should. There was a fire chief in Atlanta, Georgia that we were working with them on revitalized downtown. He's like, I don't think the city should be designed around my fire truck. I can buy a fire truck that fits the city. And it's like, wow.
That's what we do now,
Yeah, right,
right?
yeah.
We
Yeah.
can make it work. I mean,
Yeah.
we can definitely make it work, especially the center lane, the
Yeah.
center lane. I mean, that works.
Yeah.
We can make that work. And especially where we're talking about 4 blocks.
Yeah. It's not like it's everywhere.
All right. We can work with 4 blocks.
Yeah.
So where would the 4 blocks start? 144th south?
That's
And
the
how-
thought right now.
Okay. And how does that impact the light rail? Does that make any difference?
The 4-block section.
Yeah, if we do the 4 blocks and then leave the rest 4 lane as it is now, or whatever.
And that could be a future phase, I mean, the thought could be that it could be extended if the 4 blocks develops the way you anticipated.
Yeah, I mean, it's a question of how are you prioritizing different modes. So how do you prioritize bus movements through there so you can get the buses ahead of the cars before that? So I mean, it seems like it could be a workable solution. I mean, to their point, we have to study it and see how it looks. But
the street idea, the extra street idea, what makes it work is as they develop, they have to donate some section of land, right? Would we have to do that on both sides of TIB?
Well, you should.
And that becomes both an alley and a traffic mover?
You would need to do both of them, yeah.
Wow. There's actually probably more facilities like this one right here, buildings on the west side that are a problem than on the east side. But that's
Parcel.
Yeah.
That's all they have.
Would have to look at the parcel alignment and you know, we've worked with cities, like a lot of the real suburban cities in southern Florida. One city comes to mind, adjacent to Fort Lauderdale, where, I mean, honestly, it was so suburban. And they were revitalizing the corridor, and they actually mapped it on their zoning map, that when these parcels develop, this is the right of way that shall be.
Back to Dennis's point, sitting here thinking about if there was a discussion about a new street to the east on this side between 42nd, seems to me I could envision a short circuit on the other side of the street that you take the through traffic, and then you can do any of these things with what's left.
Yeah.
Basic 37th extended, or some street like that on the west side, and that becomes the bypass route, if you want to call it that. And then,
Retailers don't necessarily, I mean, again,
no, this isn't for the retailers.
But no, what I'm saying is retailers don't like it when cities create bypass routes, because it's just an alternate route.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
just,
Yeah.
it's about balancing sometimes.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it would be shorter, more direct connection, you get through good short if you were not planning to stop anyway.
Right.
We have a fairly large alternate retail area as it is. This, we want to be more of a localized neighborhood main street. It's not, we're not trying to bring families or just on business, on TIB. Now, whether we can get enough retail that would actually support all of this based on the people that live there is another whole demographics. That's a big problem.
It's interesting because there is a parcel alignment right here that goes all the way to this point. So if you could get, that's like a really logical, because it's just a straight shot. Things are a little more wiggly on this side. Well, we have 15 more minutes, or if you get, do you have more to discuss?
No, only if someone wants to discuss, one-on-one afterwards. That'd be great.
Yes.
One last question, Susan. So if the city chose to pick one of these that just is restriping, maybe some other little things go on with it, whatever, we go through that process, and what if it turned out that the traffic suddenly, we did have lots of problems, we had lots of complaints, then how hard is it to go back?
It's paint. So it's the least expensive, most flexible option possible.
And process-wise, so if we tried it and we got complaints and traffic on 42nd was horrible and Metro was upset, whatever, how do you guys feel about the process to go back if we had to?
Then that would be black.
So it then wouldn't require the warrants and all that, we just...
Well, I would recommend that we study before and after for volumes, level of service, and accidents and all those things, and then during. And if there is an after, then document that decision to change back or something else.
And the other thing is you need to give yourself a little bit of time to get used to it. At first it's going to be, well, you'll do good PR and outreach, and people will know about it, and the counselors will talk to their districts, and so people will be prepared for it. And right now you don't have any congestion that's apparent to me, so it's not like it's an a tenuous situation already. So I'm really not at all worried about that.
I'm not either, but
Yeah.
we'll have to answer that question.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Robin brought up a good point. We could easily model it with our traffic modeler and using vSIM and other software techniques like that.
On that segue, all these options, they've been modeled in VR. So if you guys want to take a look and see what those look like, and on TIB, then you can step back there and actually take a look and see what that looks like.
Since we have a minute, I'll just throw out that I live on one of the just off one of the streets that was referenced a few times last night. It was Greenwood Avenue, which is in the northern part of Seattle, and it follows the second mall with the center median is just a turn lane. We have Fire Station 21 on Greenwood and 73rd, and street side parking on both sides, and so it works. You know, you can't park within 30 feet of any intersection, and then we have traffic calming measures on. There's a lot different about that neighborhood than here in Tacoma, of course. City of Seattle installed traffic calming on the parallel streets, so we don't get a lot of diversion. That said, we have Aurora, which is the continuation, 99. About a mile to the east, and we have 3rd Avenue about a quarter mile to the west. So we have alternates, but we don't have. I don't know what the throughput is, but I'm gonna find out. I'm really curious now, but it works, and you've got storefronts up to the back of the sidewalk. You've got a lot fewer curb cuts than you've got on TIB, but you do have. We have the auto garages and the various businesses that require off-street parking. So it certainly works. Greenwood Avenue is one of the north-south arterials in North Seattle. So, I don't know what its history was. I don't know if we went from a 4-lane to a 2-lane 20 years ago. I think it's been this way for quite a while, but I'm curious to see what its throughput is compared to what TIB is projected at 16 or 20.
Well, it sounds like we're getting some competition next door, so maybe we'll wrap it up. But check out the VR, and if you have, on second thought, if you have anything that you want Paul to reconsider, we will move forward with illustrating one of these in a more detailed fashion, probably some combination of 2 and 3. But if you want to tweak anything in the interim, we have 24 hours. And that's all yours. Thank you.